Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Mama Pies Before the Lesson podcast. I'm your host, Carlos Smiley. Now, on last week, we saw the Apostle Paul, somebody that was educated in the law of the land, knowledgeable in the navigation of the political Judeo-Roman system, fluent in multiple languages, having learned the requisite skills and abilities to operate in and overcome difficult situations and people. We saw him give his testimony. He gave it in various languages to various audiences, and in every instance, reflecting his God-given gifts of intelligence and transparency. We saw Paul's nephew overhearing a plan by the Jews to ambush and kill Paul, and then he disclosed it to leadership. You see, those folks were so bent on killing him that they took a solemn oath not to eat anything until they had carried out their plan. But how many of us know that God always has a ram in the bush, a good soldier, if you will, standing at attention, equipped to move God's mission forward? And on that night, the Lord came to Paul and stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, just like you testified of me here in Jerusalem, so must you bear witness of me also in Rome." On Sunday, the title of the lesson is Paul Sails for Rome. The scriptural basis of our lesson is out of Acts chapter 27. So the question that I have, and maybe you do too, is how did we get from there to here? How do we go from the Jews' mob mentality, hell bent on killing him? How do we get to the Apostle Paul, offering up his testimony of who Jesus is? How one day he was sinking in sin, but Jesus took him in. How he picked him up and turned his life around and set his feet on solid ground. How do we go from the midst of a deranged crowd intent on murder to Jesus telling Paul, "I got you. Don't sweat these folks. And by the way, your next mission, if you choose to accept it, is to meet me in Rome." Thus, in doing, he's helping all of us to understand that if God is in the plan, there is no mission impossible. How do we get from there to here? Hopefully, after today's conversation, we'll better understand what our biblical heroes were dealing with, the heartaches that they faced, the life-threatening stands that they took, the sacrifices that they made. So if you like what you hear, click the button below and subscribe to our channel. Now let's dig into this thing and see can we figure it out. This week, we continue in the book of Acts. We continue in the molding and the making of the man. God, in all of his majesty, orchestrating the undeniable and invincible spread of the gospel through the Apostle Paul to all of the world. So after 2 years of sitting in jail in Jerusalem, Caesarea, without any day in court, he finally has a conversation with King Agrippa. Then Agrippa, along with his sister wife Bernice and Festus, all deduced, much like Pilate did with Jesus, that they found no fault in Paul. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, "This man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar." Ergo, what he was saying is based solely on the evidence that was presented to the king and to the governor. Paul should have been, would have been set free. But as King Solomon tells us in Proverbs 19 and 21, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. So, as was the purpose of God, the Apostle Paul was sent to Rome as requested, to appeal his case, or in this case, to spread the gospel at the highest levels in the known world. And as he begins his travel to Rome, as a prisoner, that is, God continued to make provision for Paul. Throughout the journey, the actual travel, it was long and it was arduous. There were high winds, there was no wind, storms and rain. Ultimately, they were shipwrecked. But Paul, having received his marching orders from the Lord, continued to stand on the promises of God, that being that he would make it to Rome. Scripture tells us that, and when it was determined that he would indeed be heard before Caesar in Rome, and that he would travel by ship into Italy, they then delivered Paul and certain other prisoners to Julius, a centurion of the Caesar Augustus band. Although Julius was extraordinarily civil with Paul, we've got to remember Paul was still a prisoner. And on their first leg, they docked at Sidon. There, Julius trusted Paul enough to give him the liberty to go and be amongst his friends and to refresh himself. Through this act of trust and respect, Julius is teaching a lesson. Julius teaches us and demonstrates for us an example for those that serve in positions of power that they can still be respectful to those that have shown themselves worthy of such an honor. You see, the actions of both Joseph and of Paul, while they were both in prison, demonstrates that you can be in the world, but not of it. They never let their surroundings deter them from their calling. Joseph told his brothers long before he ascended to power that he dreamed that they would one day bow to him. As second in command over all of Egypt, that dream came to fruition. Paul, on that Damascus road, was commissioned to spread the gospel throughout the world. There, in Rome, at the pinnacle of power of the known world, that mandate was realized. You see, their circumstances didn't dissuade them from following their calling. Now, Julius, in allowing Paul those freedoms in Sidon, he trusted Paul. And in return, Paul honored that trust by doing what he was supposed to do, by returning to imprisonment when he could have easily just kept on going. I submit to you that if Julius is civil enough to take Paul's word and allow him to leave captivity, Paul is honorable enough to keep his word and return thereto. So from Sidon, they sailed under Cyprus because of the winds that were contrary. They had more close calls as they approached Myra. Scripture tells us, and when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind. As they reached Clauda, fierce winds made the ship get caught, and subsequently, it couldn't withstand the winds. Scripture also tells us that, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they fall into the quicksands, they took sail, and so were driven. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lighted the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. Wow. When it appeared that the men's hope had gone, Paul then stood forth in the midst of them, and he said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have left from Crete, and to have gained this harm and this loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. He went on to tell them that, for there stood before me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God has given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told to me. So on Sunday, we'll see the Apostle Paul admonishing his fellow shipmates to take meat and eat. He was letting them know that, hey, I know that you're fearful. I know that you're doubting whether or not you'll live another day. I know that the changes that lie ahead of us are daunting. And I know that all of these things have taken your appetite as well as your will to live. But God has given me the assurance that we will all make it to Rome, even if we get there on broken pieces. Looking forward to next week's lesson as we go back in and dig a little deeper here on the Before the Lesson podcast. Remember to subscribe to our Momma Pie Sunday School class YouTube channel. And until next time, be blessed.